snapshot of what GTFS Builder is, for those of you who are exploring. It's a series of Excel workbooks. So I will just very quickly open up how the workbooks look. They are your schedules in stop order and the times, so that an agency has a familiar base from which to start creating their data. They take this data and convert it into the format that we're going to need, which is rows and rows and rows, stop by stop, of each trip, and we associate the trips together. And all of this is detailed in the National RTAP Training Support Center, where you can watch a series of videos one by one to learn more about this program. So today's conversation is to help you better understand what we have for the toolkit and not as much how to use it. Today we're going to ask the questions, why did our presenters decide to consider online trip planning, and why did they decide to use GTFS Builder? We have some live demonstration materials available as our presenters are speaking to us, so that something that's as visual as maps and trip planning will give us a chance to see it and not just hear about it. We mentioned briefly that they are Excel files, so you'd need to own a copy of Excel, and you'll also need to allow macros to run, and maybe our presenters could answer some of the questions of how those macros work for them if they hit any hiccups. I'll start with Mary Gaston. She's the General Manager for St. Joseph Transit in Missouri. She's capable of doing nearly everything for her agency. And as our first presenter, I'd like her perspective on building her GTFS files. Did you do this as homework, Mary, or were you able to find time during the workday? Please help us understand.
Hi, this is Mary. I made time over a long span of time to do it during my workday, just in little bits and pieces here and there. If I had an hour or two somewhere that I could have some free time, I would just kind of peck away at all of those worksheets that Marcy just showed you. We got into this because we were starting to get inquiries, requests from customers to have trip planning tools online. And so we started looking for ways we could do that. And I had looked at the Google Transit information from Google several years ago, and it was just overwhelming. I didn't know where to begin with it. I am not an IT person. Computers, I can use computers as part of my workday, but I am not an IT person, and it was just daunting, and so I backed away from it. But when I saw the RTAP series, and it was broken into bits and pieces and chunks that I could envision myself being able to learn and manage, then I was more willing to dive into it, and it worked out that way. But it was just me doing it. It took several months of little bits of time here and there to get it done.
Fantastic, Mary. It helps people realize that you don't have to solve it all in one afternoon or even in 1 week. So, Michael, if you wouldn't mind, give us a little sense of what inspired you and how you now move forward with GTFS Builder.
Sure, Marcy. I first encountered the GTFS feed a while ago, back in 2010, and I programmed a feed for Athens Public Transit as a graduate student before I assumed managerial duties. And from having had that experience of hand coding, I can say confidently that having a tool like GTFS Builder is really light years ahead of what it used to be at one time in terms of how fast you can put everything together. I think for me, I tend to do it as an extracurricular activity, usually in contrast to Mary, it's something that I do after the workday and all in one chunk. That's just how I work. I find I have better continuity that way. But it's something for us that has been just an amazing benefit over the years in terms of attracting choice riders, attracting people that are on smartphones a lot, attracting people that want easy access to information of how to use the system. So I'm a big fan.
Thank you, Michael. And Jamie, give us a perspective on what's happening in TRIP's world and how this might be supporting your mission.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me on this call today. I had recently started in this role at Central Maryland Regional Transit under the TRIP program, and one of my first tasks was to take a look at the previous GTFS that we had here that we manage for a regional transportation agency in Maryland. And we had in the past used a proprietary database software, very challenging, very murky, and hard to update if you hadn't been the one to put it together in the first place. So we saw GTFS Builder as a great opportunity to make this more user-friendly, more readily updatable, and it would enable us to show how to create a GTFS to more of the staff. So my first encounter with it had been in December, and our first transit system will be validated within the next week. So if I can do it, anyone can.
Well, Jamie, we appreciate your encouragement, and you've been passionately diving into this most recently, and maybe for Mary it's a little bit less recent that she's been thinking about it. So along with some of the rider feedback and possibility that there was a little nudge from the outside, what might have been some of the other reasons your agencies considered trip planning, or what feedback have you had, if you have gone live, about the trip planning? So Michael, you said it's been helpful for the riders that are smartphone. You're at a university, you know, college students are using this. What kind of feedback have you had?
Yeah, so we are at a good-sized state university. We have a lot of young riders, student riders, and their feedback is that along with real-time tracking, this is one of the two tools that gets them on the bus. And they really can't imagine transit without it. So I think it's very important for us in terms of attracting that particular demographic.
And Michael, do you get any feedback from those riders, like, gee, the bus stop is not quite exactly precisely shown on the map, or the schedule has changed, is the data feed going to be updated? Is there a back and forth between you and the riders that you might not have had about data?
Yes, absolutely. I think that we get that back and forth with our traditional printed schedules, but it's a lot more up to the minute in real time when you're talking about something like the GTFS feed.
Okay, so the possibility that an error gets resolved more quickly seems very, very helpful. For you, Mary, what's the feedback in your community?
I think it's been positive. One of the things that we hadn't thought about going into this project, but that has turned out to be a nice benefit, is the ability of people who don't speak English to get some help with trip planning. We have a growing Hispanic population, and we also have a growing Sudanese population here in St. Joseph. And their ability to get some trip planning information in another language has been a nice plus that we didn't think about going into it. Another reason that from the agency side that we're looking, we like this, is that as soon as we get our shapes done and are able to display a full system map, that'll kind of fill a void that we've had. We stopped printing full color system maps a little while back just because of the cost, and kind of was a throwaway. So being able to have a full color system map online when we get our shapes done is going to be a nice benefit to the customers as well.
So based on what Mary just mentioned, I'd like to show you this map for Yakima. It's not responding the way I want, but in this window, we can see the entire set of routes for Yakima, and we can grab any one stop along the way, and the routes that are affected by that stop show up on the map with the colors so that we can identify which routes are being served in that location. So if, there we go, that's what I'm hoping, is to show you the system map layer that will be available once you build out the shapes. So along with Mary's mention that trip planning in multiple languages, here we are back in Michael's community in Athens, Ohio, with a trip in Spanish, and we can explore. Well, the times don't really have a lot of language in there, but the details would give a traveler what they need in their language, and a whole range of languages would be available. So thank you for mentioning that, Mary. Certainly in meeting our Title VI, we want to have an ability to make this information come alive without having to print up thousands and thousands of pieces of material in a wide range of languages. Jamie, what have you noticed in building out your data, feedback? You do a lot of training and outreach through your agency.
Yes, one of the most important things for us was showing the regional connections. Central Maryland Regional Transit is located and handles the area between Baltimore, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. So we're working with a number of outside systems in order to make these regional connections for commuters who often cross jurisdictional boundaries. As we began our GTFS process, many of the things that Mary and Michael had mentioned, like accessibility considerations, had been very important to us because we handle mobility management here. However, we also needed to be able to allow people to plan trips between systems, and many of these systems are absent in Maryland. Our hope is to make all of the state of Maryland and all of our locally operated transit systems available using the GTFS Builder to show these regional connections for folks.
Wow. So statewide, you're confident that you can build out this data sort of one bite of the elephant, one route at a time. How many routes did you think you were going to move forward in this first phase, Jamie?
Throughout the state, we will have upwards of 100 routes through about 15 different transit systems. We will be working on that within the next year. Yes, ma'am. Okay,
fantastic. So I'm hoping that we're getting some chat questions being typed in. I still have my very long list. The idea today was that questions that had kept your agency from moving forward would be answered, so don't hesitate to jump in and type into our chat box. Back to you, Mary. You said you worked on it over a long period of time. You said an hour here, an hour there. Do you have any sense, not that I need you to go back to your timesheet, was this 30 hours over a half a year or 300 hours? Do you have any scale of what you feel it took once you got rolling and confident with the toolkit?
It probably, once I got rolling and got a good feel for how things work, it probably took me about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours to do each of our routes just to get the lat-lons, latitude and longitude numbers down. And then from there it moved pretty quickly. But I think I worked on it over the course of 6 months. But there would be long gaps between times when I had a little spare chunk of time to work on it. In fact, sometimes I was so long between times I could work on it that I'd go back to the RTAP website and review one of the videos just to remind myself what the next step was and make sure I was proceeding correctly. So those archived videos were priceless in being able to keep the project moving forward, because if I'd had to do it all without being able to go back, I would have given up. But having that tool available made a big difference. We have, I said it took me about 6 months. We have a pretty small system. We have 8 routes. So it, altogether, the time probably wasn't that much, but it seemed like it because it was spread out over such a long span of time.
Well, Mary, I think you're a little bit humble because when I look at these 8 routes, they're not exactly insignificant for your community. And I would echo what you're saying, and maybe Michael or Jamie would have a thought on gathering the bus stop locations is one of the biggest hurdles. But now, as agencies are using different ITS solutions, they may be gathering bus stops from a variety of ways. If the data exists somewhere for those latitude and longitude, you're 75% of your way to the end of this project. It's knowing how to click on the map and get that lat long or gather it from another location that takes the longest. Would you agree, Michael? Do you remember way back when gathering the stops for Athens Transit was a phase of your project?
I do, and at that point it was very challenging. And I think one of the things that's improved since then, we all enjoy much more detailed satellite data. So if you're working on a map in something like Google Earth, it's gotten a lot easier for most of us to zero in on where your stop is. At the time that I was originally doing it, there were some places that were so fuzzy that I was only getting a general area within sometimes even 100 feet or a couple hundred feet. And that situation's really improved. We can drop lat long very accurately now. So I think that that's great. Another thing I would mention for people that are just getting into this is that the decision of whether to add shapes immediately or not, I think, is a big one in terms of how much time it takes. One of the things that we're doing right now, I work for a community action agency that does several bus systems, and another of the programs we administer is an inner-city service in Ohio. And we're busy right now getting that putting a GTFS feed together for that service. And we made a decision early on that because of the distances involved, we weren't going to go for shapes on those routes. We were going to treat them essentially as an airline-style map with straight lines between destinations. And if you skip that step, it saves a lot of time, in my experience. I think that there's also a lot of value in the shape itself if you're doing local bus service, but it's definitely, if you're just trying to get in quickly, I think that that's something to be considered for sure.
Well, thank you for that. Oh, sorry, Jamie, go ahead.
It was Mary. I'd agree with that.
Mary.
We made the decision for the same reason. We wanted to keep it moving forward, so we decided to go without the shapes to begin with. And actually, the information that displayed without the shapes was still very usable. It really didn't detract from it. There are some places where, the lines aren't exactly where the streets actually are and the buses are actually going, but for the most part, it's a pretty good visual display of how the system works and coverage of the area and that kind of thing. So I don't think it was there wasn't any reason not to go ahead without the shapes as a first step.
And here is a sample of what we are looking at, where maybe it's not exactly following the road, but the traveler can figure out where they need to go, and then we'll just tune it up with shapes. And I can announce that at this point, we are going to release some new tools in the toolkit for shapes using My Maps. So stay tuned for an announcement at the GTFS Builder Support Center, where we think we have a new and easier way for you to get the shapes built in minutes and without as much detailed challenges as we've had before. So now we have a question for our panelists. Were you able to use some data from existing spreadsheets when you were building out this schedules workbook? And Jamie, I happen to have a workbook that you worked on up, and then we'll go to Michael. Jamie, what did you find when you were building out the schedules workbook? Was anything available to you to use to start?
When we first started with Annapolis Transit, we had a lot of paper map and illustrated maps, but we didn't necessarily have any hard data on bus stop locations or exact routing. So much of what we had to do was start from scratch. So hopefully I can comment to anyone who's thinking about more exact GPS location points, because we did go out and geocode bus stops. We did take a few route scouts where we rode the bus to record the exact deviations from schedule, and that's how we were able to build from the ground up with these routing systems. It appears Marcy has Annapolis Transit's Gold route up, and as you can see, it has a number of time point stops, but the map provided to the end user, to the transit rider, was more general. It showed how to get to certain places, but if your stop fell between one of these time points, it was more challenging to find. What time should I be there? Where is my stop? So our goal in creating the Annapolis Transit GTFS was to sort of mitigate that problem. It does help to have a map of where the bus travels during its route. It's not necessary, but it will help you later in the shapes building. Go ahead to the next slide, Marcy.
So this was the building of the Excel.
Correct. This is when we generated the stop times. And what this does for you in the GTFS builder is allows you to put information into the import-export workbook. And once you are familiar and comfortable with working between the two workbooks, you will have that aha moment, and it will come to you. I come from a background of GIS, so Geographic Information Systems, and my understanding of bus routes had to do with shape files, points, lines, and polygons. So there were often a number of times that I would think too much into this, and it is made to be simple and user-friendly. So using the traditional route schedule, you create the Excel information that calculates the format that Google Maps can read. Go ahead to the next. And of course, I said a format that Google Maps can read, not that you and I can read. This is what you'll get when you run your validation. On your end, it's included in your GTFS builder, and it will send back a text file. You can either view it as a text file or open it in Internet Explorer to see what errors and warnings your feed will have. Go ahead to the next slide. Now, Mary and Michael had great things to say about the ease of use without shapes, and this is an example in a visual form of what the Gold route looks like without shapes. You can note that there are point locations that most people could figure out where the bus is coming and going from, but if you do choose to take the next step and create shapes, it starts to better define the bus route. Go ahead to the next slide, please. And this is what preview will look like. So once you're comfortable and confident with your feed, you are able to submit it to Google for preview. And you can see in this one that I have two routes, both the gold and the green. And you'll note that it says confidential because preview is available only to you. So this information is not on the web. It's only for our account here. And that's helpful because the folks in my organization are able to work through this with me. Those who will be the most familiar with the routes, the stops, and the times can help the person doing GTFS to really clean up the data. In this scenario, you'll see that the gold is almost there. It's almost on a road, but it could be a little bit tighter. And this is where determining a shapes file will be helpful.
Well, thank you, Jamie. And you're coming from that mapping perspective. And so because these are maps with information layered on top of them, we're excited that we can build the shapes. We'll hope that this next wave of tools for shape building are very helpful. Michael, part of the question was using some existing data to create the Excel workbook. Were you able to build upon any of the files that you might have for schedules to create this information?
So in our case, a lot of our schedule data was already in tabular spreadsheet format. And yes, we were able to copy and paste to a large degree from those spreadsheets into GTFS Builder. And it's really not that difficult to do. Depending on the size of your schedule, there may be some reformatting issues, there may be some time consumed, but it's really within the grasp of most anybody that works with spreadsheets.
Okay, and I think one of our next questions, it might be best for you, Mary. Do you feel you needed GIS, IT? Did you have to have someone else in your city helping you with this, or did you really feel confident once you got rolling that you could do this on your own and not have to go back to school to figure it out?
I was perfectly able to do it myself using the, like I mentioned before, the videos that RTAP had made available with this. They do a good job of walking you through the steps. I got IT to help me once with my computer balked at downloading Google Earth for some reason, and so I got the city's IT person to come in and help me with that. And I don't remember now what the problem was, but anyway, beyond that, I was able to do it pretty much on my own. And I don't think any particular expertise in GIS or anything like that beyond being able to get around in an Excel spreadsheet was needed.
And I think we try in some of the videos to give a few hints or reminders on Excel skills, and occasionally we're told, I've learned a few things that I needed for other aspects of my job by using the GTFS Builder. The next question is more of a mapping question, and the inquiry is, did we find that lat longs from Google Earth are accurate enough? And I'm going to answer part of this question that years ago, before Google owned a lot of that data, the stop location would jump and move. But now my experience has been much better, that putting the pin on the map, and we can actually show you how that would work. So if we have Google Earth and we've just added a new stop in the middle of this park, we grab a pin and we put our pin down at this intersection. We can zoom in and really, as Michael was saying, wow, you know, we couldn't do this 5 years ago, see the front yard and where the stop location should be. We say okay to this. We can then copy this pin, bring it over to our import-export workbook, go to the stops tab, double-click, and select number 4, and paste in this lat long into our data set. You know, we do need to give it a name, and we do need to give it a stop code, which stop ID, excuse me, in column A. But we can grab and update any stop locations from Google Earth with a lot of precision. So I think that answers the concern that we had related to not having the time to go back out into the field and figure out that last little bit of data that was missed somehow during the field work. Any other feedback, Jamie, when you did encourage people to gather data in the field? Were there any best practices you noticed, or when data came back you said, oh, if I had only asked for this, it would have gone a little more easily?
Absolutely. I think going into creating a GTFS, the most important thing is finding an accurate location, or accurate within a certain amount of distance, for these bus stops. I had been using Google Earth, and I noticed that some of the locations where aerial imagery was taken in Annapolis were not recent enough to show certain bus stops. And in that case, we had gone out and taken our GPS unit and done a number of coordinate-seeking bus stop locations. Now, if your agency doesn't have a specific GPS unit, you can do this with a smartphone as well. So anyone who is familiar with using the Google Maps app on their smartphone can save a place, go back later in the office, and open up a location as well. So that's one of the helpful workarounds that we've found in the case that someone we work with isn't comfortable with a GPS unit, or it doesn't work, or we can't find it, or whatever you need, you can find it that way. For the most part, Google Earth was very accurate. We compared the two, and they were always right where they needed to be.
Fantastic. And Mary, when you were working on this, you were more in the office. You didn't have time to ride every route and go to every stop, and you were the one person assigned to this. Did you find that the Google Earth was sufficiently accurate for building your data?
The Google Earth was very accurate, and I would, in addition to that, sometimes I was able to use the county's GIS on their website to hone in on bus stops. They had a very recent aerial GIS mapping tool available on the county's website. So sometimes I could use that as well.
Fantastic. And Michael, thinking about it from the years that you've been looking at mapping and in the field and get the job done in building your intercity route, what kind of tools are you using to gather the stop locations?
Primarily Google Earth at this point. When I first did stop locations, I used a smartphone app that dropped waypoints, and that worked very well. And things have only gotten better since then. I think there's a lot of really pretty low-cost solutions out there that people can use. You don't necessarily have to be an agency that has specialized GPS hardware for recording where those locations are out in the field. So I would echo what Jamie said.
Okay. So our next question is, what did you feel was the hardest part in getting going? Were there any barriers among the administrators at your agency? Was this kind of your donation to the agency because nobody could understand it until you got started? What helped you get over the hurdle, or what was the hardest part in getting started? Let's start with you, Mary, knowing that for you, time is always a challenge.
Probably the hardest part was just deciding to go ahead and do it. And the webinar that RTAP did, it's been almost 2 years ago now, when this was first introduced, made a difference because I could see that it was, I could understand, and I could see that the tools were there. So it had been something I'd been thinking about for a long time, and just having the tools available finally made it possible for me to dive in and get started on it.
Okay, thank you. What about for you, Michael? Was there any place that was hard? Well, I guess your hard part was a long time ago. How about in building the intercity? Let's do something more recent. Anything that's made it difficult for you to get going except time?
Well, it's funny that you should mention a long time ago and then the intercity, because I think in both cases the same thing has really held true. And both times, I have to admit, it's caught me a little off guard, and that is the amount of time to get your agency approved by Google and to go through the Google quality assurance process. I think when I initially encountered it, I had gotten all my data together and was happily ready to just go ahead and have this up on the web, and then I realized that Google really takes their time in getting you approved and making sure that your data is vetted. So I think that it's important for people to build that time into their development process.
So Jamie, that kind of leads to you. While this may not be the hardest part, I'm going to show what the screens might look like. There's a partner dashboard, partner-google.com, and you haven't quite gotten through validation yet, but you have begun to see what your validation report looks like. And how has that been going for you, Jamie?
This has been going really well because it provides you a visual to accompany both the schedules workbook and the import-export workbook. So now you can see, do my short name and long name appear the way I'd like them to? Are the colors rendering the way they should, and do they match the schedule? I think I have to echo what Michael said. The time it took to get through Google's validation considerations was a bit longer than expected, so that is something to keep in mind as you progress through this. Now, within this screen that you guys can see here, it'll provide a little bit more information on where your stops are, where your routes are, and it will allow you to do random queries, testing the efficiency of your routes and your feed.
And sometimes the random query tells a person to walk because it's a very random set of data that's being tested, and that may be the most logical resolution is to just walk between the two. I don't remember, Michael, if you would have even had random queries on this first pass before, but if in a case that we see a trip plan that does suggest walking and maybe another option is available, you can go into the trip planning piece and ask it to not give us the best resolution, which may be to walk, but less walking. And let's see if we can get that trip plan to come up for us. Well, Jamie, you'd know better than I. Why don't we grab a different kind of trip? So in this example, Jamie, talk us through a little bit. The current trip plan here for the rider is rather long. I don't know whether this is about a 3 or 4 mile stretch. Currently, they'd see about an hour trip plan, and then we can show them what happens when your data is going to come alive.
Right. So again, with the numerous transit agencies that are present between Baltimore and Washington, it's very helpful to see all the options. Until you have all of the options present on Google Maps, you may see things like commuter buses, which will also be more expensive and will take longer. With our new Annapolis Transit feed up, we've reduced this trip here, which is about 3.5 to 4 miles, from 57 minutes on a commuter bus and $7 to a $2 and 27-minute trip on one of our local buses. Because we serve a transit-dependent population here, it's very important to have this information available.
Fantastic. And then if you have evening service, that's different than daytime service. Again, those layers will just pop up without you having to think through, oh, that's right, there's a footnote on that printed page that reminds me to look here for more information. It all just layers for the rider in a very simple interface, even though the series of options that the rider is seeing are quite complicated. Their choices can be displayed on what they're calling now the Explorer. And let's see if we can get that Explorer up for someone who hasn't seen it yet. And now all of the different choices from A to B, which might include some walking, some bus, less walking, more bus, and then the next morning when we go to whole different colors that would take the rider from those two locations. So we're very excited about being able to show the rider all of their trip options in one interface without having to ask them to call us for the information or flip through the book. So in one of our chat questions, we're asked about showing the times that the bus arrives, and perhaps the question is it possible to show the departure time? So I'd like to better understand that question, and we'll see if we can investigate more fully with Google which time we want to show, because in our data set, we can request both an arrive time and a depart time. And Jamie will use the example here on one of your routes, in the gold route where you have a 5-minute layover. That data, we'll look at this 622 trip, will come up in gold A here on our trip plan as arrive and depart as different times. So we'll look at gold A and see the arrive time and the departure time as 5 minutes different for actual trip planning. So I appreciate that we want to understand how the data is displaying and where it's coming from and whether we can have a layover, because it is important that our GTFS builder match to your data as accurately as it can. If we have a few moments, because the question of shapes has come up more than once, and the toolkit that is now available through google.com, I actually have to type in my maps, M-Y-M-A-P-S, to see this page, allows us to draw, and then here's a data layer for Mary's community. We can draw this route. This is Route 18 for our community in St. Joseph, and copy this by exporting the data layer. Oops, I don't want the entire map, I want the direction. We can download just this data, and of course it wants to have an error today. Well, we do have a video showing that it will download, and then we can bring it into our Excel spreadsheet and then in and out of Google Earth, where we can edit the line as we need to. And we would edit the line by just choosing the shape and modifying a route if we needed to move the line to a different road, if there's construction or the route has changed. And that's how easy it is to build and modify routes in Google Earth. So we're thrilled that we have a new set of tools for us, for ourselves to use in terms of the shapes. I've had some agencies tell me that their policy board would not allow for a straight line flyby approach because they feel it would confuse riders, and we don't want to hold anyone up for that reason. So, Rob, do we have some questions for our participants today that we can ask and then see if any final chat questions have come up?
We do, and I just realized we have a number of questions that came up as well, and I'm sorry, it's more just trying to track those, but let me pull up a couple of other poll questions. Okay. And this one has to do with whether you think that after hearing this discussion that you'll proceed with GTFS Builder or even other GTFS applications that enable you to create GTFS files. If you don't mind answering this, that'd be great for us. And what I'll do, Marcy, is send you a couple of these questions. Unfortunately, it's I didn't realize that there were some that came in. And just to let everyone know, if your question wasn't answered during this presentation, what we can do is have Marcy and the panelists review the questions, and we can send you an email with answers, or we can post it. That's probably what we'll do. We will be posting the recording of this as well, so that if you need to go back and review what was stated during this webinar, you'll be able to watch the webinar on our website. Okay, I'm going to close this and share it. So it looks like over half of the folks that have participated in this webinar are very interested in proceeding with GTFS, and the other over 42 or around 42% are not sure. That means that they're still interested, and nobody said no, which is fairly exciting, as we think it'd be great for folks to start to work within GTFS and build their files. We do have another question that I'd like to post. National RTAP will be having a conference in Denver, Colorado in October, and I should know what the dates are, and of course I don't have it in front of me, but if you go to our website, you'll be able to see information about the National RTAP conference in October. But if you would like to see any sessions on GTFS Builder and GTFS, the conference will be October 27th through 30th in Denver, Colorado, and I believe it's at the Westin. But what I would suggest is going to National RTAP's website, which is www.nationalrtap.org, for more information about the conference and other information about the National RTAP services, including GTFS Builder. And Marcy, I don't know if, we have about 6 minutes left, if that's okay with folks. What I will do is keep on feeding you some questions if you want to do that. Okay, I'm just going to close this and share it. And it looks like a few people, 10%, would be interested in a workshop on this. Many people are not sure, or they won't be able to attend the conference. But there's a small group of people that would be interested, which is good to know, and we definitely will be having some information workshops on GTFS, as well as practitioners that use GTFS. Let me, I think I sent a couple of questions over to you, Marcy, if you want to.
Fantastic. Yes, you did. One of the questions asked about real-time data, and for an agency to publish their layer of real-time data on top of the Google Maps, so that if the bus is running late or a little early, the customer can look at it on one smartphone application. You would need to have your GTFS static, this data from GTFS Builder, published before you can proceed to layer on top the real-time information. We are not yet using the Open Trip Plan Toolkit. That's another tool that's available that uses GTFS Builder. And if any of our panelists have used OTP, please speak up. We're not supporting it at this point just because we need to get the data in before it would be useful to have it published using another trip planner other than Bing Maps, Google Maps, and Yahoo. So any of our panelists using OTP at their agency for an internal trip planner? I guess that's a no right now. I had a question about the fact that this data can be reused, and so do we have any feedback, Michael, perhaps, that some of the apps that developers are using, certainly in a university setting, are exciting the students or invigorating your reuse of this data?
Yes, so I brought up the point that as agencies we have the ability to decide whether or not our GTFS feed is published publicly. In other words, whether we make it available to third-party software developers and app developers. And in Athens' case, we did make the decision to have it be a public feed. There's a database of feeds that you can access that's maintained, and whenever a feed updates, that's reflected in the database, and any third-party software developer can then go in and use our data and wrap it for a variety of different app purposes. I think the most recent one that we popped up in, there's an app that Nokia does that is something like Google Transit Directions, but branded and tailored a little more for their user base and their phones, and we showed up in that. So you can't quite tell when you make it public how it's going to be used, but it also, I think it opens up a lot of exciting possibilities.
So thank you, Michael. Sometimes we believe what we're doing has a narrow band. The band is very, very wide once we standardize this data. We did have a question whether Google Maps or Bing or Yahoo would be providing us, the agencies, with our statistics on how this is used. I haven't seen it yet. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem when we get a free option to use their trip planner that they can hand back to us statistics. But I do know if you put a widget on your website, you can see whether someone is clicking through to create a trip plan. Is that something you monitor, Michael? I know you're a little more tech savvy than maybe some others, and you do have the widget on your website.
I'll be honest, we use Google Analytics pretty heavily, and I've never figured out how to pull use for that widget off of Analytics. I'm still working on it, but no, we haven't been able to. It's something we'd like to do.
Right. So
okay, anyone else? Jamie, for any of the prior data that's been up, or Mary, do you know whether anyone captures any usage?
We have a similar problem here where Google Analytics provides a snapshot on who's using the website, but would not perhaps pull the exact numbers for who's trip planning or where they're going. But that data is definitely on our wish list. That, if we had it, could help us really develop out gaps in service.
And I'd echo that. We don't have any real data on how our Google Transit stuff is being used, and we would love to see it.
Okay. We do need to wrap up very soon. We have a few more questions about how long does this process work with Google, how long it takes, and unfortunately we'll just have to add that to our list of questions that we post to our support center, and we do encourage you to make sure to join up at National RTAP, sign in to the cloud, and access your GTFS Builder workspace, download your files, and go into the support center. These videos are written, as Mary explained, in very short 1 to 2 minute, 5 minutes at most, segments, so you can watch and go, come back, review, and we're hoping that will continue to support you in your efforts. We're always welcoming feedback, and while we need to be respectful of your time today, we very much appreciate that you participated and hope that you reach out to us as a team so that we can answer your questions in the future.
Okay, Marcy, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Jamie McKay, Mary Gaston, as well as Michael for being a panelist on today's presentation. And we hope that those of you who have attended this webinar see that it is doable, takes some work, but certainly the information that you're able to provide to your end user is very invaluable for them to make decisions on getting from point A to point B. I'd like to thank you all. At this time, the webinar will be ending. If you need more information about National RTAP or GTFS Builder and this webinar, you can go to www.nationalrtap.org. You can most likely be able to watch this webinar once again Probably within a week, you just go into our website, go to webinars, and then those are all the ones that we've recorded are posted. So thank you very much, and I wish everybody a nice day. Thank you.